Welcome everyone to episode 124 of the NewGen Mindset podcast. I'm Dan Kozel here with Nick Tartaglia. Nick, it is so toasty outside. I can
It's
barely
toasty.
breathe inside here.
It's toasty. It's nice, and it's perfect because gold is kind of doing well again, kind of moving back up. So it's like Robert Kiyosaki says, money is gold is God's money. The sun's out, it's bright, it's warm, and gold's doing well again. So it's nice to see that,
Yeah, and
especially
to
when all
our
the prices of a lot of the mining stocks have been coming down. So it's kind of nice to see gold go back up because it's like, okay, maybe the mining price will kind of move again the way we want it to.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too because the U.S. markets are closed today. So if you're in the
hmm
U.S., happy 4th of July and happy belated Canada Day to all of our listeners. But there's a bit of a contango happening right now. This is usually the time where people are going on vacation, deals kind of slow down. But there's always a surprise that kind of unravels when you least expect it. That's usually what happens, at least in the mining space, from my experience. But what we wanted to do today is really bring on somebody who has a wealth of knowledge, and has been doing what she's been doing for a very long time, but at the same time has always been at the forefront of, I think, a very interesting company too. And we wanted to bring somebody on that's going to allow us to really connect with a much broader audience. So, this lady, she's got over 20 years of experience in the mining industry. Started off as a mining child before joining as an analyst with Endeavor Financial. And she had an investment banking career as well in London. And she has completed over $1.5 billion in financing for all of her clients. And she is currently the CEO and president of Empress Royalties, which trades in Canada and the US. Welcome to the NewGen Mindset podcast, Alexandra Sharon.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's great to be here with you.
So, Alexandra, the first thing we like to kind of do is kind of go down a rabbit hole and get a sense of the past of the individual, where you come from, and then what led you into where you are today.
Okay, so I started out in the industry when I was 14 years old. I was one of the first employees at Endeavor Financial, and I was in charge of research, which meant I would go through the yellow pages and call all the
Mm,
mining companies in Vancouver and get them to send over their annual reports when they came out. So way before the internet and all of that. I then went on and did my commerce degree. I joined PwC. I was in the audit group there for a while, and then I joined Endeavor Financial as an analyst. And actually, when I joined PwC, it was in 97, and that was just after Bre-X, and I joined the mining group of audit. So it was like a ghost town. Everyone was jumping down to the dot-coms. So I've seen the sector go through a lot of different phases through over my career and all the ups and downs. But yeah, so joined Endeavor as an analyst in Vancouver. At that time, there was a fund we were managing, so I managed and did all the reporting and the analysis on the fund and different investments we were doing. And then I moved into the project finance side. So that's structured finance. Essentially, that was arranging debt financings for various mining companies, allowing them to get their mines into production. So we did the first project financing into Russia for a company that was then called Bema Gold, now called B2 Gold, for Kupol mine. We did some of the first project financings into various countries in Africa, like Eritrea and various other countries in South America. So really came from that structured finance background as again, I was director of structured finance in London for over 10 years.
Is that what kind of influenced you into, well, quickly touching on the Empress side, is that why you kind of transitioned to the royalty side of it? Because I guess you're kind of dealing with that financing side all the time.
Yeah, so understanding the structured finance options, like back in the day, there was sort of two ways mines could get mining companies could get their mines built. They raise some equity and there'd be some debt. And then a long time ago, Wheaton Precious Metals was then called Wheaton Silver, established itself, and they established that streaming finance solution. And what we were seeing in Endeavor Financial is that the streaming companies were doing bigger investment sizes of $100 million plus, and that no one was providing that streaming finance solution to the junior side of the market. And that's what we said at Empress. We knew there was an opportunity. We knew there was a demand for that alternative financing, which is becoming more mainstream now. But that was the initial concept of why we launched the company is knowing that there was a demand and we could fill that gap with our product.
Nice. And so now going back to kind of your experience and your journey in the industry. So as Dan mentioned at the beginning, you are a mining child. You started really early. I guess it's because your family started off in the mining. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because nowadays it's not, I mean, I mean, I don't know anybody that necessarily grew up, meeting you. You grew up in it, but I don't really know many that did. So can you kind of give us a little bit of that journey, that experience, or kind of witnessing, seeing your father be in the industry and what that kind of did for you?
Yeah, so my father did many things in New York. He was on Wall Street for years, and he came out to Vancouver. We all moved out here to set up a merchant bank for a large mining company. That quickly changed and evolved to him establishing Endeavour Financial.
Mhm.
And BMO Gold, Clive Johnson was one of his first, or his very first client in the mining space. Hecla, various companies early on were some of the clients. So I got to see that kind of entrepreneurial side of the business and that mining finance side of it. At a certain point later on, Frank Juster teamed up with joined my father, and sort of Endeavour Financial rose to a greater level. So there was project financing, there was M&A, there's a corporate finance arm as well. And in that I got to work with some of the greats in the industry and been mentored by them. Frank Holmes at one point, who runs US Global, was the chairman of Endeavour Financial. Clive Johnson, again, one of the clients, my father, Frank Juster, just to name a few of the great minds that I got to watch and learn from. The mining sector is I think, a unique sector. I did leave it for a brief spell and came back in and really missed it. It's full of, very dynamic people, very strong entrepreneurs. It's a tough sector, but it's full of very lively, colorful, intelligent people. You've got amazing engineers and geologists running these companies, and there's some great finance people in it, great lawyers. But it's a very strong entrepreneurial spirit within our sector.
You mentioned something too that's really fascinating. It's a strong spirited entrepreneurial environment because, as you know, and I'm quoting Rick Rule here, if you invested in the mining sector and you had a really good few years, your portfolio would still be down $2 billion. It's a $2 billion loss business. And on a down year, you're losing 8 billion, right? So you definitely have to have sort of that persistence and sort of that tenacity to kind of just push through the hard times. And I think what we're seeing now is like, this is the beginning of another cycle, right? And so maybe just paint a picture, I guess, for the listeners, especially people that are new to this space, that are just trying to get into it because they know what's ultimately coming on the horizon. But like, of all the cycles that you've seen, like what were some of the key lessons that you learned, like maybe in the first one that translated into the second one and that maybe translate now into this upcoming cycle that we're going head on with right now?
Yeah, I mean, I really feel all the indicators are there for the cycle, for this to really become the next boom in mining. You look at the different trends, and I'm at a lot of these conferences, and whether I'm meeting with companies to invest in or meeting with investors, but I also get to hear a lot of the leaders in our industry speak, and so many of the indicators are there. You're seeing, gold is up over 23% this year. You're starting to see the stocks are starting to move. In Australia right now, they're really moving. Canada, we feel, will catch on next and into the US. But all the indicators are there. In terms of the perseverance, I think is really part of a lot of the entrepreneurs who have been in the sector for a long time. There are people that come in and out, but when you're looking at companies to invest in, look at the history of the individuals, the successes they've had. There's times where we can, companies can go out and raise a lot of equity and really build their companies, but there's a lot of times we know that money is going to be cut off, and how they survive during those times and what they do with the companies to advance them, whether they're continuing with the drilling, whether they're making sure that their relationships within the communities are strong. So when the money does start flowing again for them to develop, they're ready to go. They're not waiting to start getting their permits. They've done the work. So there's, a lot of, there's a lot of people in the sector. There's, a couple thousand companies that people can possibly invest in, but really looking at the management teams. Again, I'm fortunate because I have been in the sector for a long time and understand who some of these great leaders are and who has the perseverance to survive throughout the different cycles.
Yeah, and I guess that's the key point too, is especially when, like, depending on which point of the cycle you're entering the industry as an investor, let's say, I guess the only real foothold you have to really make sure you kind of navigate through the cycle is if you have a strong management team that can leverage their experience, leverage their network, and they know what they're doing regardless of where the prices are. Because, like after the last cycle, when the debt prices collapsed, so many mining companies got destroyed.
Yeah, no, it really is. And seeing who survived and who's going to keep going. Yeah, very much so.
So what about as an investor or from the outside, not from the mining side itself, like how do you see the industry changing or in terms of like where like investor involvement or in terms of knowledge of the industry?
Um, I've really seen over the last couple of years, and maybe it's perhaps because of COVID and so many people were on Zoom and watching YouTube and doing a lot more education. Maybe it's also the fact that, Rick Rule is a large shareholder in my company, and I obviously follow him closely, and I
Mhm.
have a lot of investors that have come through Rick's sort of school of investing, and that really is doing their homework. And I mean, rather than buying on a broker's recommendation like it used to be in the past, people are
Mhm.
going through and they're going through our presentation. They're doing research in the projects we've invested in. They're reading through our financials. Every time the financials out, we get lots of questions. They read through our AF. They read through the information, our circular, what we're putting out there. And part of it for me is really being available to have those discussions so I can educate and explain why things are happening and maybe how to, walk them through it. So I think investors are much more savvy now. Even for myself, when I'm investing into the companies that we're looking at, we obviously do extensive due diligence, but before we even have initial conversations, I'm on YouTube watching the CEOs. I'm,
Mhm.
tracking down the communities they're in and seeing what the communities are saying in the area. So you can do so much from your own home of due diligence and investigation. And I think that's really shifted over the last couple of years. And people, I think, have a thirst more for knowledge or for knowledge. Maybe I'm fortunate, and that's the kind of investors that we've been attracting to our stock
Mhm.
that I'm talking with. But I really feel there's a much higher level of education and time that people are putting into their investments.
So
I
do
mean, I
you,
think,
oh yeah,
sorry,
go ahead. No, no,
no,
go
no, no,
ahead, go
no,
ahead.
no.
Oh,
I
I
was
was
saying
just,
that one of those things where you have to read the financials. And if you can't
Mhm.
put the time into reading the financials and the press releases of the company you're investing in, then you shouldn't perhaps be investing in them.
What I was going to say was, is it fair enough to say then, compared to the last or the past in general, nowadays you're seeing much more of a forefront movement where investors, especially in the mining industry, want to be involved and really want to engage with companies. Whereas in the past, like you said, maybe you were going more through brokers or portfolio managers, so you didn't really have that interaction individually with investors.
Yeah, and I think most of the great leaders I know in the sector are available to talk to shareholders. They're not going to have to go through the receptionist and never get hold of them. And I think people are much more, again, through the Zoom thing, much more
Mhm.
available. Yeah, it's definitely part of it.
You mentioned that, okay, doing some due diligence over Reddit. I guess that's pretty fascinating. Obviously, that wasn't something that was available maybe, 20 years ago. I just can imagine people sifting through yellow pages, kind of on their landline, excuse me, trying to get in front of the right investors, right? So
Yeah.
I guess what was it in your mind that kind of made you realize like there's just a much deeper source of information now? And maybe I'll kind of lead into that. Was 2021 perhaps kind of an epiphany for people in the mining space when GameStop and AMC kind of started getting all that traction?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember I was actually it was during COVID, obviously, and there was a lot of travel restrictions. And I was actually down in Mexico looking at a property there, sitting around with a very interesting group of people in Mexico City on the finance side of things, and having that discussion of looking at the Reddit and, unbelievable what we were seeing happening, so different from our sector. But again, I mean, there's a lot of different types of mining companies and companies to invest in. And the exploration side, development companies, producers, royalty and streaming companies. I think people, if they're looking for a quick punt, there's things out there, but I think people should be much more long-term, proper investments.
So here's a question for like this is more for the younger generations. Why is it do you think that they built such a bad rep around the mining space? Like what is would you like is there a drastic difference relative to the past where nowadays there seems to be much more of a bad rep, especially with the younger generation?
When you say bad rep, can you expand on that? Because
Sure, yeah.
obviously I've been in this for so long, so it's hard for me to
Yeah,
kind of
so
pick up on things, but
it's like, for example, nowadays you'll have a conversation with them where they love the idea of electrification and going green and all these things, but the moment you mention mining, it's like now the world is over, forget it, there's no mining. Well, it's like there's this conflict, this intellectual dilemma where it's like you want the world to electrify, but and you want more metals and stuff, but you don't want the mining. Like you can't have one without the other. It's kind of a necessity or necessary evil, I guess they would say.
yeah, there's a couple great videos out there. There's one where it's like the world without mining, and it's this beautiful song that's played, and it's in the middle of a city, and then eventually over the course of the song, even the musicians fall apart and everything, they're back to being cavemen.
Right.
So, we do need metals to continue on. There's obviously the critical metals and what that can do. There's obviously gold and silver, which I feel are real value compared to some of the currencies that are out there.
The precious metal side of it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's different types. I was also just recently on a panel in Quebec City where I saw you there. And that was part of the discussion we were having was we are so terrible at representing ourselves as a sector. We don't get out there and talk about enough the good that we do as a sector. The concept of mining's bad and polluting the environment. There's so much work in good projects that goes into meeting the World Bank standards, the Equator Principles, whether that is how the mine's operated, all the safety checks that are in there, all the standards are unbelievable. And that's something we don't talk about enough. The social impact we have is one of the other reasons I love the mining sector. Going into areas where there has been no education for children. There's no availability for hospitals, for surgeries. And these things are real and they happen. There was one company that I was working with many years ago in Africa, and they were a development project company, and they knew they were probably about 2 years from getting the final permits they needed and the final financing. But they went in and they had done their environmental social impact study, and they'd recognized it was probably at most 100 students that would be in the area that they were going to build a school for. And the deal with the government is the government would have one teacher they provide, and that everything else would be funded by the company to set it up. So they opened the school in advance of the mine being built. The first day, like over 300 kids came, and they were walking hours and hours to get there. But the government wouldn't increase it. So the teacher ended up teaching the parents, and then the parents ended up teaching the kids. That's just one example of many. There's other ones where, there's no access to, again, medical procedures. And then surgeons are brought in to do, if it's severe, obviously taken to hospitals further away, but, for some of the kids, some of the eye surgeries that are done and these types of things. So there's so much that, one of the ones I invested in Peru, they've redone the whole water system for them. They've got the roads repaved. And I mean, in Peru, they're at the side of a mountain. So that's really improved their ability. They've brought in Wi-Fi for them. So the education for the kids is there. There's so many good programs that are going on. And another one is animal husbandry. So they're teaching them how to do the proper vaccines for the animals, how to raise a healthy flock and those types of things. So I don't think we as an industry talk enough about the good that we do. And I think there's definitely a disconnect with the younger generation who wants electric cars and all these things that you need mining for. So yeah,
I agree. Yeah. Did you ever get to see the documentary by the World Gold Council, the gold one? Did you ever see that?
Yeah, that was fantastic.
So you see, so I thought like when I saw that, it's something I kind of suggest now to people all the time, but I feel like it's an outlier video because there's not enough of that type of content to really highlight the industry and the social impact, which I feel would really kind of make people realize like so many communities started off only because of the fact that somewhere else in the world they needed something. So you needed to mine it out, and it allowed you to kind of build. I mean, it's the foundation of civilization. You can't build walls, you can't build houses, you can't build bridges, you can't build streets, you can't build tools. All of it is the foundation is mining. So people kind of, I guess it's the privilege of having built so many wonderful things that we kind of forget our roots, which the mining industry really is our root. It's either agriculture, you either mine or you grow it. That's a thing we always hear in the mining industry. But we seem to have forgotten the value of what the mining industry has done for us and the potential value of it moving forward as a civilization. You can't evolve without it because, I mean, everything requires new metals, upgraded metals, a new type of technology, a new type of tool. Not all that foundation is based on metals, and gold, it's one of the best conductors. It's necessary. And the part of me obviously believes that if we go more into space, I feel gold from an industrial standpoint will have more and more of a role to play because, it's a really good deflector of heat and it's really good conductor. So like in space, I feel like it would have even more relevant outside of the monetary purpose of gold, which is something that a lot of people within the mining industry kind of focus on. But I entirely agree with you. I feel like, it's that. It really is. I think that the space as a whole kind of has forgotten the value of working together and trying to really put out a better image and put out a better story to kind of help the next generation understand the value of the mining world. You don't want to neglect it.
No, and I did some work in Sweden at one point, and I was dealing with the mining association there. It's kind of bringing back like 10 years ago. And they had started a program because obviously their roots was very much mining based, and they kind of lost focus on that. And they were struggling with getting, the communities to be aware of the positive impact of it. So they started a whole education series going into the elementary schools and doing this sort of 3-hour ceremony or education series, and then that became something that they would come back every month and then teach other things about it. And that I think we need to do in Canada. I mean, it's obviously Canada, the US definitely needs to have that education level for the children too. There's actually some cool kids books that are coming out now, explaining some of this as well. So there's more education happening at the basic level.
It feels like too, Canada particularly has so much potential right now. It's just not being utilized to the maximum degree. And prime example, I guess, is sort of I'm not bashing the climate here. That's not what this is, right? Like the climate is important, but there's sort of been this narrative of like, oh my God, if we don't take care of the planet or we don't take care of the temperature of the planet, we're not going to exist in 5 years. And that narrative's been going around for like, I guess since like the 1960s, right? And so maybe that has obviously contributed to sort of the mindset of a lot of people, because they hear it and they're like, yeah, that does sound important, but they actually tend to forget sort of like what the execution of it or what the logistics behind something like that and how you apply it. But with Canada, I mean, like we're such a naturally rich in natural resources. Like, what do you feel like it's going to take for, first of all, I guess the government, which we like to talk about, what is it going to take for them to realize, okay, maybe we got to speed up the permitting process and stuff like that? And then I guess from a cultural standpoint too, like what else do you feel like is missing right now that maybe the industry hasn't seen maybe in the last 10 years?
I think education, big time. I think we need to get out there and tell what we're actually doing and talk about it. I don't know. I mean, there's so many things to unpack on that one. Permitting in Canada, with my company, we actually don't really invest in Canada or the US because of the permitting issues and because it takes so long. So it's much faster to get a permit, and they go through the same process, same amount of work, but it's much more efficient in Africa than it is Canada. So, a lot of that capital that I could be spending in Canada, I'm putting into other parts of the world.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It really is. It's fascinating how the industry as a whole, the biggest barrier is the government, which the government can make so much money off it. Like what like I'm only asking because maybe you might know this, but I know Australia is always a reference point for the mining industry of how much more kind of easier it is to be a mine over there, or at least from a mining standpoint or an investing standpoint. Is there lessons there that we could take for like can we kind of like absorb and apply it here in Canada?
I don't know enough about the Australian to sort of talk to that, but I think it's just general education, and I think
Yeah,
we've had so much focus on the climate here, and we've perhaps lost sight of some of the things that we actually need to actually help the climate or
correct.
to stop some of the destruction. So yeah, I think that's quite a complex topic, but there's a lot more we can be doing for sure as a sector.
So why gold? Why was that your choice?
You know, we are now the only pure precious metals royalty and streaming company. So we are only gold and silver. That was done, several reasons. One, we believe that gold and silver are going to go a lot higher and will continue to, and that's been proven out. When I originally started this company about 4 years ago, we were modeling our financials and our projections at about 1750 gold. It's now close to 23, which is over 23. So we knew there was a big upside on that. For us as well, we feel that when people really do understand that we are pure gold and silver, we'll get a better re-rate, because our revenue is only coming from gold and silver rather than diluting it with other metals.
And why did you take the royalty approach? Like, this is really what I'm trying to, like, the point is really here, we're trying to understand really the mechanics of why one might take a royalty approach versus a traditional being an explorer or trying to get out the asset and sell it out. Because there's not many royalties out there.
Yeah, so I probably if it's cool, I can take a step back and kind of
Yeah, of
explain the
course.
different types, because I feel like people kind of look at the mining industry and they're like, they're all producers or explorers. They don't understand the different types of ways to invest in the sector. So there's the exploration guys, and they are amazing geologists, and there's some really good stories out there, not stories, some really good companies out there. But that's a lot of drilling and exploration work needs to happen, really long time to become a mine, if it ever does. I don't care what the stats are. It's like 1 out of 1,000 actually becomes a mine, or even less than that. And then there's a bunch of companies out there that they figure out there's something in the ground and they want to build it. So the development companies, and there's other ones that are producers. And there's obviously some that have a cross between all three. A royalty and streaming company is different in the sense that we're not operating a mine, we're investing into them. So with a royalty, it's where we get a percentage of revenue from production from that mining company. And then a stream is where we either get to buy gold or silver at a discounted price from the mine. So think about a royalty like a record deal, and a stream is basically we're pre-buying something at a really discounted price. With a royalty, I'm getting cash coming in on a monthly basis or whatever the particular contract is. With a stream, I'm getting direct gold or silver credits to my metals account at Bank of Montreal. So I'm really tied to gold and silver. So I can choose to sell the gold or silver, hold on to it, whatever, wherever we think the market's going. And as we grow as a company, we'll get more to that point. So you really get that direct exposure to it. There's different types of royalty and streaming companies. There's only about 30 that are public. They're the ones over the billion, big boys. You've got the sort of mid-size, and then quite a few junior ones, especially that have come out in the last couple of years. But within the royalty and streaming sort of universe, there are the prospect generators. So they are out there, they're more exploration focused. So they're either creating the royalty from a package they have and then selling that project to a company and then getting a royalty back for that. But there's no guarantee it'll turn into a mine, long lead time, if it will ever actually produce. Then there's a whole bunch of groups buying third-party existing royalties. So there's no direct relationship with the company, but it's a pretty simple acquisition. It's just buying a piece of paper, essentially, in a contract. We're on the creation side, and that goes back to my background and the team's background in structured finance, where we're investing into a mining company, helping them get into production or expand the production capacity. So that creation side, to me, is where we can add the most value, where we can see really good returns as a result of that, because the projects have typically been de-risked because they've got the permits, they're ready to go, and then we can come in with that final piece of capital to help them get into production.
It's just so our listeners understand, it's basically like buying real estate, except you're buying real estate that is significantly de-risked and has obviously an exceptional management team, mining assets are in production. One of the assets you guys currently have is Luca Mining. And that's been a very interesting, I've been following that since about March, and they just came out a couple of weeks ago, really good quarter. They're paying down debt. Rick Rule talked about it, how that was one of the names that he had bought. So we saw some good price action there. What was it specifically, I guess, about that company that kind of stood out to you guys to say, hey, we got to help these guys kind of get out there and continue to build the mine, continue to produce, and then obviously a benefit to shareholders for Empress?
Yeah, so we invested in Luca 2.5 years ago. At that point, they had the one operating mine, Campo Morado, and then they had the mine Talahueto, and that's the one we invested in. So at that point, there was some debt, there was some equity, and they were short $5 million, and it was about half built. So we invested the $5 million as a silver stream on that project, and then they've been working through and trying to get that mine going. So it's taken a long time, but they're getting there now. They're really, really close to being at their fully constructed and producing. So we've been working with them through their experience. We take security in all the investments we do. In this particular case, we were behind some other groups. So we took a seat on the board. So David Rose, our executive chairman, became chairman of Luca, and he's been instrumental in some of the changes that have happened over the last year with management, and so the turnaround of that company. So we're very excited for them to finally get Talahueto fully going, and they should hopefully by the end of this year be at the full commercial production.
And Mexico in particular has become very attractive, I think, specifically for silver, right?
A long history.
Very long history there, and some phenomenal mines out there too. I guess with the recent, because it's kind of hard to look in the investing world without kind of looking at what's happening geopolitically. But with what happened the last, I think it was a month and a half ago, there was a new election. Like, is that had an impact sort of on that community? Do you feel like there's more positive upside, or is there still some things that companies are trying to wrap their head around to kind of see what plays out these next several months?
I think definitely see what plays out. I think there's a difference between the type of operation doing underground versus open pit. The different commodities you're doing have a big impact on that. Mexico is the different states are very different, and how you operate within those different states. There's definitely some that are much more mining friendly than others with the different governments. So it's not really a blanket answer you can give to that. It's quite complex. There's different ways of operating in Mexico as a foreigner coming in as well. I mean, when I met with the former Minister of Mines a couple of years ago and we were having dinner, he was saying to me, there's a right way of doing business in Mexico and a wrong way. And it's respecting the local communities and local governments and operating and making them, becoming partners with them, not looking at them as the opposition. There are some excellent groups operating in Mexico. And again, it really is very different in different parts of Mexico. We went into Peru during the elections that were happening there. I mean, that was like changing presidents every few moments. And the president was up saying, stop all mining, forget it. The next day he was in a plane in New York and saying he loved mining. So there's a lot of antics that happen. We get very close to when we go into countries, we've usually been there before. We understand the geopolitical environment. We understand the legal framework that's there, what laws are upheld, how to take security, how to get money in and out of the country, following their rules and understanding it. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons we are quite happy operating globally is because of our experience in different countries and going to those countries again.
And
I think
go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, I think one of the other areas of the world really is like Africa. And you mentioned it earlier. It's a much more expedited process, just getting permitting and stuff like that. One of the other assets, right, that you guys have is in Mozambique. So maybe just talk about that. It looks like it's an open pit mine. It's in production. Really interesting project as well.
Yeah, so that one's owned by a group called MMP. So this was a plant was there. They needed additional capital. They bought the plant, and they needed additional capital to finish it off. So we put in $3 million on that one. We took it as a gold royalty. That was I prefer streams, but the royalty made sense in Mozambique just with the legal framework that was there. This was a group that David Rhodes, our chairman, had known for a long time, and that was how we had the opportunity to invest. Mozambique is not known to many people, but over $15 billion of LNG investments gone in the last couple of years. So the country really is open for foreign investment, and it's been for us a fantastic investment. We've been, receiving consistent revenue for 2 years from that project. It's a fantastic operation. The work they've done in the communities is great, but yeah, consistently operating in that project.
Which of the geographies kind of excites you the most in terms of your operation?
I love it's hard. I like all the countries we're
She
in.
loves all of them.
I know I do. It's horrible to say that. I really like the one we've just gone into in South Africa. They're just ramping up. I spent a lot of time in South Africa throughout my career, so I'm very familiar with that how to operate in that environment. We're looking at a couple other ones in Africa right now, some really exciting ones we've got term sheets out on at the moment. So hopefully we'll be able to advance on those ones and really dig into them. But this, I still absolutely love Peru and operating there. There's other countries we're looking at as well in South America. We're starting to look at some opportunities in Asia at the moment. Countries we've been before, there's some exciting opportunities there. So we've got some term sheets out there as well, or one term sheet out on one in Asia. So yeah, it's with our portfolio, it's always making sure we've got that diversity in there. So some of these advance quite quickly and some take quite a while. So you try to make sure you've got that balance all the time as they advance.
Oh wait, I just lost my thought. I was going to say something. Well, can you so I don't know too much about the Asian market in terms of the gold. Can you talk about some of the locations or some of the geographical locations that are kind of where there's potential for you guys?
It's hard because until I've got a deal done, I can't talk about it.
Okay, fair.
Just to be fair, and I would love to because one particular country we're looking at the moment, I'm very
She's getting excited just thinking
I know
about
I am,
it, right?
but
So we're under LOI.
until the deal's done, it's not done. And sometimes these deals take a long time, which is very frustrating. I would love to do more faster, but we go through such an extensive due diligence process. There's some that we've gone through the due diligence process and they haven't checked out. So we own 25% of the company as management and board. So if it's not the right deal, we won't do the right deal.
So what is it about the mine industry that in general that excites you the most?
The people,
The people?
potential. Yeah, it's the people who I work with. It's the people who I, know from our sector and get to be inspired by, whether they're running their own companies or whether they're, amazing investors like Rick and
Yeah.
Stephen Gleason or Brian London. There's so many, great
Mhm.
people out there. But it's also the people in the communities that we're going in and helping. It really is, for me, the people side. There's also a hell of a lot of money to be made.
Yeah.
We're kind of in a great sector in that sense, especially with how undervalued the stocks are at the moment.
No, yeah.
It's so undervalued. There was a gentleman who's become a recent shareholder in Empress, found me through a YouTube video as he was looking to invest in the sector, and he's been in different sectors. He made a lot of money in real estate after the collapse. He made a lot of money in banking after the collapse, and now he's going very heavily invested into the mining sector, especially gold and silver, whether it's royalties or developers or producers, recognizing how deeply discounted we are. And I'm hearing that quite a bit from some of the Middle East groups I've talked to as well recently, who have not been in the sector before, but are now coming into it in a pretty meaningful way, because they realize how undervalued we are.
Yeah, I agree with that one.
The Middle East was always interesting because I think this was the first year where they actually had a massive mining conference. I think it was in Saudi Arabia, if I'm not mistaken, and it was like the first time ever. And I mean, if you that whole area, I mean, there's just so much capital waiting to be deployed. Um, was that something that was around maybe 20 years ago, or is this sort of like a new age of wealth that's kind of emerged as a result of obviously oil and gas, because that's been their main source? But now there's just been such a significant interest in mining, that all it really takes is one of those big funds to come in, and then you're like, you have a partner possibly for a very long time.
Yeah. I think they've been there in a small way in the past, probably more UK listed companies or something that had more of a European African connection. But we're definitely starting to see them come into the North American markets, and the stocks here. There's, a lot of generalist funds that seem to be looking at the mining sector, which weren't. The oil and gas, absolutely. I mean, even within the US, there are oil and gas groups, big funds that are now looking to get into mining, which is that hasn't happened in a very long time.
Wow.
Some of the conversations I've been having recently have been really interesting. So we'll see what that comes, but things are really feeling like they're starting to change right now, and we're just at that starting point in a lot of ways.
And it's
I,
true
I'm
because
just
if it, oh, go ahead, Dan.
I was just gonna say, like, if you follow Tavi Costa, he's
Mm.
posted that chart several times where he's got like, the gold index is like this, the producers are up, but like the junior miners are just still lagging, and at some point that's just gonna springboard,
Yeah.
and it's probably gonna be like, oh, we're all the crypto traders are gonna start coming into the mining space at some point here.
No, but I was
Yeah.
just gonna reinforce what you were gonna say because I was gonna say like if you looked at like we were saying before, right, Alexandra, if you looked at the prices of companies themselves, you don't really see it doesn't really feel like the space is waking up. But if you kind of look at the rest of the world, you look at the geopolitics, you look at the way governments want to spend money, then it's like something's brewing. It's like something's coming our way. There's a wave coming. And it's kind of the opportunity of a lifetime to kind of really get in where things are so cheap and you have prices of metals that are higher than they were in last cycles, and prices are not even close to where they were in the last cycle.
No, absolutely. I was at the African conference in Daba, which is every year down in February. And, China has been investing in Africa for,
Mhm.
25, 30 years. They've been all over Africa. And now we were seeing, big US government was there looking at it. There was the French government, the German government,
Hmm.
the British government all wanting to invest. And it's like, China's been here for 20 years. You guys, this is the first time you're showing up.
Late to the party.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And hopefully that from them coming to that and getting more involved, they'll start deploying some capital into some of the critical metals companies. But yeah, definitely a change is happening within even the governments. I mean, Germany, I met with the minister there, and they're looking to deploy over $1 billion into mining in Africa. So it's definitely changing slowly, but it seems like it's just all starting to build up. So it's a very exciting time to be in the sector. Very exciting. I feel more excitement now in the beginning of this cycle than I have in any of the previous cycles. Like it's just so obvious to me that it seems to be happening.
Is that because you've experienced the last one, or is there something else that maybe is the
It just
same but different this time?
it it feels different. It feels like it's going to have a lot longer life, and it feels like it's there's been so many false starts to it. We all, again, we've been in the sector for a long time. We all know it's going to come. It's just when and for how long. This just feels like it's going to be substantial and for a longer period of time than we've looked at other ones. If we only had that
Well,
perfect, to look
yeah,
at
the crystal ball,
all
we would know, right? We'd all be trillionaires at this point.
yeah,
Well,
exactly.
in the last macro report I put in that we wrote, I put in a detail where the G20, the top, I believe it was the G20 countries came together saying that they want to spend over the up until 2030, $800 billion on infrastructure in the G20 countries. That's all commodity based. Like none of that happens without commodities. So it's like, yeah, and people say, well, why are prices moving? And I say, things take time for it to trickle into the economy and actually have that money actually impact level of price levels. So this is a waiting game. It's a patient game. And I know, like being I would consider ourselves some of the younger guys in the generation in the industry, because in the sense that we're used to dealing with a lot of the older people, and a lot of them seem to have been fatigued with the mining prices because it's been lagging for so long. But then I say, sure, from your perspective, that's the way you might see it. But as a younger person in the space, I don't mind being patient. Time's on my side on this game.
Yeah.
So it's exciting for me because you see what the world is moving and the way we're demanding all these metals, but the prices are not moving. So it's like, okay, I don't have to rush. There's no FOMO, which is fantastic.
And also, if you look at because the mining companies have been so underfunded for so long and the
Oh yeah,
exploration
exactly.
is not happening. I mean, there's going to be a lot of companies doing very, very well when they hit something because there's just not enough metals out there. The exploration work has not been
Correct.
done at all. And there's I can't remember the stats I saw, but I saw something on that recently. And it's mind blowing how little work's been done and just hasn't been the funding for them. So hopefully that money does start coming to our sector and we can actually get back out there and start doing some great discoveries.
Going into sort of the next 6 months, what do you feel maybe, and this could be specific for Empress, or for commodity investors or people just trying to get into precious metals, what do you feel like investors should expect, at least maybe in the short term, that could be a little bit more exciting than what we've seen over the last couple months here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll start to see some good movement later this summer and in the fall. We'll see. That kind of typically when it starts to happen, then you get a bit of tax law selling happening after that.
It happened prematurely here too with capital gains, but that's
Yeah,
part of it, I
exactly.
suppose.
Yeah, there's always some excuse to sell, but I think for Empress's point of view, we've kind of got a couple of things, quite a few things happening. We're hopefully bringing some new investments to the portfolio. So that will, really increase diversification, increase the revenue coming in as we start putting our financials out. We doubled our revenue last year. Once we put the financials out, everyone's seeing what's happening with the money coming into the company, that will be starting to reflect it. And I think as people really understand we are the only pure gold and silver royalty company out there, that should also start to get reflected as the equities start to reflect where the commodity prices are. So there's quite a few things I think that could, for Empress, really have some re-rating and some catalysts happening for us.
Well, I mean, I think the last price that I saw was about 32 cents, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, if you're a small cap investor, there's nothing more exciting than finding a gem underneath 50 cents. And, it's pretty interesting how the whole business model is just centered around, two metals, like keeping it simple, and obviously a wealth of history and knowledge. So, I guess just one last question. When you kind of look at the world as a whole right now, sort of the direction that it's going towards, is there maybe an added layer of risk perhaps this time around that maybe didn't exist 10, 15 years ago?
With the world being so unstable at the moment?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the world I feel is very unstable. And I mean, that's the other reason why, I personally do invest into gold. Just feeling sort of the political climate that we're in, whether we're looking at the US or other pockets of the world, they're going through so much turmoil and challenge. I feel a very unstable moment in the world.
So you would say you're also a believer in the monetary philosophy of the value of gold, not just from its industrial component or the fact that you sell it or whatever you finance mining, but you also believe in the philosophy and the foundation of what the value of gold.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm guess being around Rick Rule and Frank Justra and Frank Holmes is kind of a great influence on that one. You're three hardcore libertarians that are big gold believers, so
Yeah.
I can kind of get that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, and obviously following them and other great minds in our sector. Yeah, I think yeah, very much so.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I think it's an exciting time too. The hard part for people in our age group is just convincing them that when this rally really starts, I mean, perhaps their faces will kind of explode because they'll be like, how is that even possible? But it's really just getting over that hump of saying there is a whole other asset class over here that when the market does unfortunately kind of capitulate, I mean, it's risk off, that entire sector is going to, really start to shine, pun intended. So no, this has been a very, very awesome conversation, Alexandra. Really appreciate it. Where can the listeners find you?
Our website is empressroyalty.com. We're on most social media channels. We have a YouTube channel, which will repost this video as well, so you can check us down there. Email is info@empressroyalty.com. Reach out to us. We've got a calendar link on our website, so just click on that. You can book a meeting with Natasha Frakes, my Vice President of Investor Relations. I can jump on the call. I'm happy to talk through anything on Zoom if anyone has questions. And yeah, we're available. We'll be at Rick Will's conference next week.
That's next week in Boca.
Boca Raton, yes, great time to be in the heat. Thank God we'll be in air conditioning for 5 days. But yeah, so we'll be at that conference. But again, I'm happy to jump on a Zoom anytime with anyone to talk through our business, our experience, our portfolio in more detail. We've got a presentation which goes to some of the stats. We're trading at a 50% discount to NAV. We are trading significantly lower to any of our peers. So I can talk anyone through any of our information.
Awesome.
And the ticker symbol on the venture is EMPR, and on the OTC, it's EMPYF for those of you that are still listening. Again, Alexandra, thanks again so much. Have a safe time. Have a safe travels to Florida. I know that's going to be an awesome time with Rick Rule. And listen, I think we're all investors here. So at the end of the day, it's all about accumulation. I like to call it accumulation station because you don't want to be chasing the leg up when it starts.
There's no FOMO
through to the upside, and then FOMO starts coming in for sure.
And then when the sector goes, it goes.
Yeah,
I've witnessed
exactly.
it many times before. So yeah, it's a very exciting time. Thank you guys so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It is always a pleasure speaking with you.
Of course.
And everyone, thanks again for listening. Check us out at newgenmindset.com. We just launched a soft launch of our new website, and our macro report came out, and you can check it out on Substack. And we'll see you next time, guys, on the NewGen Mindset podcast.
Ciao, guys. Take care.